Hey guys, what's up? My name is Elizabeth and welcome back to my YouTube channel. So in this video, we are going to talk about Lamentation. Now let me just first say, I realize Lamentation is probably not the top book that you're going to read from the Bible. But wait, there's actually something good in Lamentation, even though it's kind of hard to see, because Lamentation is actually taken off from the word lament, right? So Lamentation really shows the humanity of despair, but also shows the divine hope that we can have in God if we're willing to look in the bigger picture. Now, the thing is, if you just read Lamentation, you might miss it. But if you're willing to look at Lamentation in the context, in the scope of the whole narrative of the Bible, you will see that there's hope. And that's one thing that we have an advantage as readers from the 21st century compared to those in biblical times. They were not able to see the full redemptive narrative that God has given us in His Word. They're in the midst of that. They're still looking towards Christ while we get to look back to Him, right? So we're able to see the bigger picture, and that's what I really want to talk about today. So first we're going to go over the outline and talk a little bit about the history of it, and then I really want to get into the application of it. So with that being said, let's jump right in and get started. Okay, so the book of Jeremiah was most likely written sometime during 587 BC, during the time of the destruction of Jerusalem. And this was a very devastating time for them. Now, the author of this book is most likely Jeremiah, even though some people have liked to debate that, but honestly, you can debate a lot of things. So we're just going to go with Jeremiah, and that's how I wrote it in my exegetical paper, by the way, which I had to write, which I'm adapting this video from that paper. Now, I really want to talk about the different styles within the book of Lamentations. So there's communal lament. So lamentation, lament. Okay, see this? There's a connection there. So there's individual and communal lament. Funeral, dirge, dirge, which is pretty much another form of lament, wisdom, instruction, and thanksgiving. In chapter 1 to 4 and 4, there are 22 verses, and each word of the first letter, so think of apple. A is for apple. So their poetry would have been an for A, right? If we correlate it with all versions. So 22 verses each that correspond to the order of the Hebrew alphabet. Then you go look at chapter 3, which has 36 verses. So pretty much what they do is they keep repeating the same alphabet letter 3 times before they change it and go down the line of the alphabet. This is called Acrostic Style. Now, some people have debated that this person could really do an acrostic style if they're really lamenting about the destruction of Jerusalem. But I would say it is very possible. Another interesting thing is that when you get to chapter 5, the whole acrostic style is completely gone. This could signal the display of just how much chaos has arisen and how the writer tried to keep it all together, but now he just can't anymore. So now that we've kind of talked about the background and the authorship and the date, let's talk about the outline. So in verse 15 through 18, it really talks about the reaction towards the destruction. And then in verse 19 to 22, it talks about the reaction towards God's restoration or lack of. In verse 15, it describes the outward emotion. It displays that all the joy the people once had is gone. The people's moment of joy has completely stopped. And now has turned into complete lament. So then in verse 16, we have the symbolism of sin as disgrace. It talks about the crown falling off the person's head. Now, some people have described this as possibly the falling of the David dynasty. And this could possibly be an explanation, but I think it could be both. It could be that that David's dynasty has fallen, but it's also the fact that just the shame upon the people, right? And that they pretty much lost all the dignity that is left, right? So the final image that could be portrayed of how sin has defeated the people and the land. It really just shows the wretchedness, the chaos that one chooses a life without God is what pretty much 16 is depicting. So then in verse 17, it talks about the inward emotion. This writer is now feeling sick. Most likely it would be Jeremiah writing this. And he's just talking about his sick. His eyes has gone dim. Now, if you ever look at a sick person, you will pretty much notice that their eyes aren't right? And you can see if someone's stressed, their eyes aren't right. I think there's like this thing that eyes are the window to the soul, pretty much. So the eyes can give a lot away to you. It can tell you if you're happy, sad, mad, angry, a lot of things with just your eyes. So then in verse 18, it reveals the reality of sin as this disgrace. So it shows Mount Zion, which is a very important part to the Israelites, is now desolate. The only thing that is remaining is jackals now. And this is a big deal. Mount Zion used to be a busy place. It was a thriving city, and now it's nothing. So verse 19 focuses on the reaction towards God's judgment. And it praises that God reigns forever and that his throne never ends. See, he is putting his whole prayer here on the fact that God is sovereign. God is in authority of everything. He's in authority of punishing them, and he is in the authority of redeeming them, of restoration. And in verse 20, the writer focused on the reaction towards God's judgment. He mentioned God's authority, which affects God's judgment, as I just said. So it's this reaction towards God's in charge to judge these people. So finally, in verse 21, the writer fully makes a plea for restoration. He requires the Lord to restore the people to himself. He not only wants the people to be restored to God, but also to the days of old. Now, the interesting thing about this is I think sometimes people get so focused on the blessing that they once had that they're more focused on getting their blessing back than they are about getting back to God. And sometimes I feel like maybe this author is thinking like that. However, I don't think that is the case, but it does seem to convey that somewhat. And then in verse 22, it pretty much leaves you with a very much of a cliffhanger. It pretty much says, unless you have rejected us forever, is how that works. So please restore us unless you rejected us. That's literally how it ends. And though there are times where they literally try to put the verse 21 after verse 22, or at least repeated it again, to give it sound a little bit more hopeful. So now you might be wondering, Liz, what do I get out of this? This just sounds like the most gloom and doom passage almost out there. So what can we take away from this? I think the first thing for principle-wise is that sin affects the inward and outward being of humanity. The second pertains to verse 19 and 21, which is God's authority displays judgment and restoration. The last principle is found in verse 20 and 22. Sorry, 20 and 22. There we go. That God does not abandon his people, even when it seems like he has done so. So now let's get into the application part of this, okay? So what can we really take away? So we said the principle, so how does this really affect our own life? I think the first thing it can really affect our lives is to notice how much sin devastates society. The second is that God has the right to judge us. The fact that we are in hell already just shows that God is gracious, that he's holding back his wrath, just waiting for us, right? But the application I really want to focus is on this, that God doesn't abandon us, even when it feels like he is. Sometimes we get into like moments in our life where we just don't fear God, but it doesn't mean he has left us. It just might mean that we're not focusing on him. Or it might mean that he's trying to teach us something. I want an illustration that I wrote in my, I think it's one or maybe the only illustration I wrote in my Exegetical paper was this. It's kind of like a child. Have you ever been sent to the corner? As in when you had to just sit there and think about what you did? Right. So if you ever done that before and you just sat there and thought about what you did, what were you really thinking? I remember watching one person in the corner, and one of the things is like, is it time yet? Can you come out yet? Right? And at the moment, it feels like, the child feels like, hey, the child just feels like, hey, has the parent forgotten me? Has my mom and dad not going to pay attention to me? They're still there. Now, the thing is that they're still there. They're still probably in the room somewhere, or at least in the surrounding areas. They haven't forgotten them, but the child feels like that, right? I think one thing that Lamentation really shows is that God is there even when you don't realize it, even when all you see is the judgment, even if all you see is destruction. Just look around in the United States right now. Look at what's happening. It kind of seems like, where is God? Where is our restoration, right? And the truth is, God is still here. He is still in the midst of all of this. He is sovereign. And honestly, the fact that the U.S. hasn't gotten as bad as it has, is God just waiting? Is God being patient, right? Is God holding back his wrath, right? We are sinners, right? And so I think that's just a really good encouragement today, is that even when we feel like God has left us, he hasn't. He is still right there working, even when we don't see him. There's a song about that, I think it's called Waymaker. Even when you don't feel him, he's working. And I think that's what it shows in Lamentation. Even when you think you're utterly rejected by God, he hasn't rejected you. He's still working on you. I think ultimately what we can take from this passage is that even in the midst of judgment, even in the midst of trials, what we learn is that even when it feels like God is rejecting us, in reality, he is working in us. So with that being said, thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe, push that bell button, and get notifications so you never miss another video again. I'm really excited for some things that are coming out pretty soon, because I have some projects that I've kind of been working on over the past weeks. And so yeah, I'm really excited to show you that to you all. And so yeah, so please subscribe, push that bell button, get notifications so you never miss another video again. Please subscribe, I always said that. How many times am I going to say that? Please subscribe, push that bell button, get notifications so you never miss another video again. Comment down below, give me a thumbs up, and I think that's a wrap. God bless you, and I'll see you next time.